Welcome to the Art Studio Insights podcast, where we demystify the creative process and exchange ideas with career-minded artists. We are your hosts, Adriana Amay and
Jackie Sanders. We're two emerging artists sharing for the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journey. So if you are not already, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you will be notified when we drop a new episode every Tuesday. On today's episode, we are so excited. It's going to be a little bit more of a low-key episode, but in the season of thankfulness and gratitude, we just want to really take a look back at the past year, share some wins and some big lessons that we have learned throughout the past 12 months.
Yeah, good or bad, but we're gonna share with you.
Worse.
I know. Hey, it's sweet and sour. That's life. And as a way to put a cherry on top of this celebration, we actually have a big announcement for our listeners, but that's at the end of the episode. So stay tuned. So we're going to start with a year in review. So we're going to put our lenses and kind of look back, see where we were a year ago, which I'm just going to go ahead and dive us right in, might as well.
Yeah.
So we had only been in our studio spaces 3 to 4 months at that point. We were still in the middle of the shutdown.
Yeah, and I think that's so funny because we've shared on other episodes that you and I both moved into our community-facing art studios in July and August of 2020. So technically community-facing, but we are still in hardcore shutdown where we lived because of the pandemic. So even the end of 2020, we were still fully shut down, which honestly was kind of nice from an art perspective, simply because we had time to get used to our spaces. We didn't have to rush to get ready for an event. And we really had time to live in our studio space before having the public infiltrate our intimate creative space. But it was definitely very different from where we are now. We, of course, are still taking all the safety precautions in our space, but we do have First Fridays and we are open to the public 5 days a week now. So it's very different these days compared to
back then. Yeah, when we moved in, we weren't even open to the public for several months after we moved in. And you were moving over from a home studio, which more on that in a second. And I was moving over from a different studio building. And that was a whole production as well. But yeah, looking, in the time capsule, right, a year ago, on my end, I was still adapting again to a new studio space. It was much bigger than my old space, which is both good and bad, because it also meant, oh my goodness, now I have all this space for extra shelves and materials, and I don't have all that yet. So it took a lot of planning. Plus, I was sharing the space with another artist, so there's also a lot of negotiation. Which wall do you take? What color do we paint the walls? And
it becomes a collaborative decision rather than you can take over the space.
Exactly. So there was a lot going on. And that's obviously very disruptive to the art making process, because you're just distracted with all these other things you have to do. And then during that time, despite the pandemic, I was still applying and getting accepted into exhibitions, a lot of them online, of course, and helping set up a virtual one for an artist collective that I used to work with. And then also, but wait, there's more. Around this time last year, I was also working on creating small pieces and ornaments for upcoming markets, because around this time, things were still a little bit, they were starting to reopen. You remember that, Jackie? It was
especially outdoor events.
Yeah, but more outdoor things were happening. Yes, you had to be masked up the whole time and everything, but a few things had come back kind of for the holidays. So I was doing a lot of small stuff and ornaments and whatnot.
Especially because those kind of events ship too. Because that was a big thing. I know when at this time last year, well, first off, 2020 was supposed to be my year of networking in person, going to galleries and doing markets. That was my huge goal for 2020. It's I want to start doing markets. That was hilarious. So even by the time it got to the holiday season, I kind of took the idea of markets off the table. So this time last year, I had never done a market, never done a public display of just my work. And I had really only had 2 or 3 pieces in larger group exhibitions, which felt huge at the time. Like that blew my mind this time last year that I was included in group exhibitions. And really moving my studio, adapting to the new space was a huge thing that I was trying to get used to, because as many artists do, I feel very connected to my studio space. I feel like it really influences the work that I make, both the scale and the style of it. So the pieces I was working on in my home studio felt huge. I was doing like 18-inch squares. And then you go into this, what felt like a huge room when I first moved in. I'm like, oh my goodness, I feel like I have no artwork now. And you kind of just grow into the spaces that you inhabit as your creative space. And especially this time last year, I had the opportunity to have a Q1 2021 exhibition, a solo exhibition, which was my very first one in a corporate space in downtown Raleigh, Industrious. So those pieces would be way larger than anything I had done before. So I was really trying to mentally and physically prepare for that. Basically creating the entire series in 2 months was kind of okay, I can't think about markets. I can't think about holidays. I am tunnel visioning on this solo exhibition, which honestly was kind of a nice distraction because I didn't go home for the holidays like I had done in years past. So it was kind of nice having a nice creative project to dive into, but definitely tunnel visioning. Like I just need to get through the end of the year, as I feel like a lot of people were thinking during this time at the end of 2020.
Yeah, for sure. It was definitely a wild one, to put it nicely. But yeah, we had a lot going on. Like everybody else, things were reopening before they shut down again, of course.
Yeah. So what were your thinking about going into the holiday season? You're obviously doing markets. What was really your focus for 2021? I know you and I talk a lot about like
before or after the pandemic hit.
Fair. Well, I guess if you're doing like a 3-year plan, you would have a vision. But by the end of 2020, what did you think your 2021, or what did you set your 2021 goals are at the end of 2020?
Well, thing is, like some of the first that you mentioned, I hit them in 2019 while I still had my corporate job. So for me, 2020 was essentially about expansion. I had already had a solo. I wanted another one because why not? I was going to do more in-person events, festivals, things like that. So going into 2020, it was more about getting my work out there even more than before, but in-person type events, and obviously all that went out the window.
Right. Especially knowing that we had that public facing studio to leverage. I think that shifted both of our goals a lot.
It did. And I think it helped too that we found out about getting the studios about the beginning of the pandemic. So we had applied around
like
February. I think mine was February and your application was March, something like that.
Yeah.
And a month or two later, we found out that we got in. So it kind of helped. Definitely a sweet and sour year because we were like, no, pandemic, post this, like everybody else. But we were like, but at least saving grace a few months from now, from the time we got notified, at least we're gonna like get the studios in our dream place. So
right, even if they weren't immediately open to the public, we knew eventually at some point they would be. Man, honestly, I wish we like had recordings of those conversations.
Oh,
like
so
early
too.
pandemic. Like I would go on my daily walk, would be like, I would say it'd be an hour, realistically it'd be like 3 hours because we wouldn't be able to stop talking. So like, okay, at least if we're talking art, I'll just like walk in circles around different shopping centers and get like miles in.
Hey, we kept ourselves sane somehow. I will say that much. So art besties are the best is all I'm gonna say about that. But at least making plans for 2021, it was kind of like, okay, we pandemic is still a thing. We don't know what will open up. So it kind of changed the
Right.
goals a little bit as we pivoted. Magic word of 2020, really.
Pivot, pivot,
And
pivot.
oh my goodness, yeah, it was definitely
Yeah,
pivot,
just
pivot.
go
We're
with the
like,
flow, survive.
yeah, that's a do not enter a road, turn around, U-turn. It's fine. It's fine. We're very resilient human beings in general. So
Yeah.
there is that. Anyways, and not to minimize, of course, all the bad stuff that happened. So there is that
Right.
too.
Very true.
But at least planning for 2021 was more along the lines of, okay, assuming the stuff does not get better overnight, which obviously it hasn't, and we're still somewhat in the middle of some of that, then I kind of took my goals and kind of changed them up a little bit, made them less dependent on in-person things, and kind of said, okay,
Yeah.
so some of them were fine-tuning my creative output and learning more about my creative cycles. So we're not horses.
Right. It's not a rinse
We're
repeat.
not race horses. We have to understand our creative
Yeah.
cycle has ups and downs, which episode in the future that we have planned talking about that.
Yes.
I decided, okay, so if in person is not an option, or I don't want to depend on it on being an option, then I want to explore more income streams and art products, which is more online as a way to help kind of level up or level out the sales side of things.
Right.
Wanted to get more experience working with the press, exhibitions, and special projects. More of a focus on sharing forward my art, business, and technology knowledge through a podcast, which of course we ended up doing that, so that worked out,
Yeah.
and an artist community. I wanted to have a way to give back to the community at large, including non-artists. So through that, I was basically conceiving different ideas for participatory projects and volunteering with a local arts nonprofit. So some of these ideas had already started in
Yeah.
2019 and even before then. And then I was like, okay, how can I do it in 2021? So I was just kind of working some of that. And then one of the biggest challenges that I had, that I was like, this is it. I'm going to do this. I don't know
Just
how I'm going to
full
do this, but I'm
focus.
going to do
Yeah.
this, was I wanted to create a full series of work, which I already had like various series of artwork, like various bodies of
Right.
work, various styles going on. And I wanted to basically say, I want a body or a series of work just about this one style.
Right.
Initially, I think I wanted like 20 pieces, and then there's over 100 now. But
That's how you know it's a good style and a good series, though, because yeah, you were definitely juggling. They were all connected, and you
yep.
could tell if they were linked, but it wasn't necessarily like a set style you are known for, quote unquote.
Nope.
And I think that's a very different undertaking and takes that intentional effort. Some people think that because it, in hindsight, it's like, oh, well, of course, that's why these pieces all merge together to become this style that you're known for. But it really does take intentional effort and conscious discipline to make that happen.
Yeah. And
That's
we've
a really
talked
good
in,
annual goal. It
yeah,
takes more than a month or 6 weeks. So that's
takes
definitely
long.
needs to be on the annual scale of this is a long-term commitment. We're in this relationship for better or worse. Let's go.
Yep. And it takes discipline. And it's something we've talked about in previous episodes regarding kind of finding your lane in a way.
Yeah.
And we've talked about like the whole make 20 and see what happens kind of thing. I had already
Right.
started that in 2020, but I dove even further. Like I was like, I've gone far in this. I want to go deeper into it and explore more personal themes, but they say sometimes you can go so personal it becomes universal, and that's what I was going
I
for.
think that's so true.
Yeah, so yeah, that was mine. How about you?
The end of 2020. Yeah. So let's see. So I always describe like 2020 was the year I kind of like blew my entire life up in the best way possible. I think a lot of people can probably relate to that idea of, obviously, with the pandemic just being like totally shaken up to the core, but also just in every aspect of my life. I feel like there was nothing off the table for reevaluation. And so, especially at this time last year, I had just moved both my studio space and where I was living at the time. And I had just actually not yet, but I was about to accept a new day job. So having the ability to work remotely was a huge goal of mine that I hit before the end of 2020 to really give me that flexibility to be in this studio, to meet with art friends during the day, during my lunch break, and have more control over my own time. So that definitely influenced what I perceived as possible in 2022 by making a lot of those big changes. So with that though, I kind of had to really just shoot in the dark in terms of I didn't know what was possible because everything was so new in the best way, but also most limiting way. So I'm like, at this point, so much is different that like there's nothing that's impossible right now. Kind of having like an invincible aspect of what is permanent. I don't know. Nothing's permanent in life.
Quarter
But
life crisis, kind of.
basically a quarter life crisis in I think the best possible way. So 2020 was the year I blew everything up. 2021 is really the year I, of course, had to then focus on rebuilding. And especially when it came to my art business and art style, I really wanted to intentionally focus on making my art my business. At the time, I had already had a website. I had launched pieces on my online shop. I was starting to write some blogs, sending newsletters once a month, and trying to have those systems in place. But I knew, okay, 2021 is when I set the goal to really create those systems and processes that would be the long-term business goal of mine. So posting consistently on the blog, having a strategy with social media, being super consistent with my newsletter, and the crazy idea that Adriana like planted the seed in my head about a podcast like the second week of December. And I was like, eventually, yes, but I was like so overwhelmed with my solo exhibition. She's like, we need to start January 1st. And I'm like, you are crazy. Your energy, you were like so excited for it. And I was like, I am too, but let's be strategic. Let's think like March. And then it ended up being May, which was perfect. So that was definitely like starting to percolate in my mind of, from a business standpoint, connecting, bringing people together. Because again, we were still so isolated. I mean, we had each other, but we really both craved connecting with other artists. And we know that other people are out there probably craving the same thing too, without the connection that we had or the space, like art space that we had. So that was definitely a seed that was planted at the end of 2020 that continued to grow. And basically by January was full on. And our online membership as well. Like just how can we connect with as many people as possible? And honestly, I would say that those goals were pretty spot on when looking back on the past year. But based on your goals, how do you feel like your 2021 goals went from like a very high viewpoint?
Wild ride.
Constantly reassessing, constantly pivoting.
You know that expression of throw everything at the wall and see what sticks?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Hear me out, people. Hear me out. So, yes, I do believe in like finding your niche and focusing and doubling down on what you're good at, your zone of genius, the things you're into, all the things, right? But especially when you're in those initial stages of building out your art business, you don't know what you like until you try it for a lot of different things, right? So like some of like the things I was envisioning for some of my like potential ways of earning income, out the door, left and right.
You're like, I think I want that, and then you try it.
Tried it, not really my thing. Like for example,
which is good. It's
yeah,
good
and I've done it. Yeah, like things like, okay, teaching kids. I love kids. They're adorable. They're awesome. Don't want to teach them. Not really. And I had done it and I've still done it and I'll probably still do it, but it's not something I want to focus on and say I want to be known for being a kids art teacher for kids. Like that's not my jam. And that is okay.
Right.
Yeah, so I've tried it, I've done it. Do I like it? Yeah, but do I want to do it all the time? No, I don't. So it's like, okay, out the window, unless something just lands on my lap and then I get to do it, probably not really going to pursue it. So just being
Right.
honest. So it was a lot about learning about my own capacity, about my time, about asking for help to avoid burnout, which can be really hard.
I didn't even think about that. That's definitely something I
Yeah.
think both of us learned, and helping
Hmm.
us stay accountable with that too. Our
Yeah.
crispiness phrase, which we talk about with fellow artists all the time. I don't think we've talked about on the podcast before, but Adriana and I have this like almost secret language at this point where it's like, as a creative, most of us, and even like an entrepreneur or business owner, you know that feeling of burnout.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, through experience, you can kind of start to realize your own personal symptoms of like, okay, I'm nearing that point. And
Starting
so,
to get cranky or
yeah.
losing sleep or
And for
yeah.
me, that's like compromising my nutrition, skipping a lot of workouts. That's like, okay, you can do that for a while, but if you're trying to do that long term, I'm gonna burn out. And so, going to our favorite baking metaphor, if you think about making cookies, rather right before you burn them, they start to get a little crispy on the edges. And so
Mhm.
we always say, okay, like, yeah, I'm feeling a little crispy this weekend. I need to take a break. And like both of us know exactly what that's gonna mean, because you really have to do that. You have to take the pastry out when you see it's getting crispy, or else it
Or
will
actually before then. Yeah.
before you get crispy, ideally. But even the slightest sign of it, because it goes from slightly crispy to burnt so quickly, and it takes, then you have to make a whole nother batch. You have to
Yep.
prep the dough, you have to do them, like, it's so much better to just avoid it, because even if you push through one more day, that might mean 4 days of 4 or 5
Of
or a
recovery.
week of recovery, rather than taking a night off or a day off. So
Which
that's
now that I
definitely
think
a
about
lesson
it,
we've learned a
that
lot this year. And we
yeah.
use that phrase all the time. So if you ever see us in the studio, we talk in future episodes, be like, yeah, I'm feeling a
Crispy.
bit crispy.
Well, and I think that analogy you just did also works for sports and for working out and
Oh,
things
for
like that. You
sure.
need to take a break. I mean, you can try to
Right.
push through it, but why would you? Then you
Right.
hurt yourself. So in
Yeah.
art, it's the same way. It's like they say your inspiration tank needs to be full. Like you need to refill it. You can't just use it up. You got to refuel it. So that's
Right.
if you're just running yourself tired and working yourself to the bone, your output's not going
Yeah.
to be great. And then it might take you a while to recover. So just take breaks. But that's part of it. We
Yeah.
digressed for a second.
We should do an entire episode on burnout, because
We
I feel
do.
like,
Yeah. All right. Add it to the list.
yeah,
To our
because I have so
giant
many
ongoing list.
analogies that like the crispiness analogy, like so many other, like you're saying, sports metaphors or stories, that I feel like if you think of it in a different lens, it can be super, super helpful. Because I'm sure there are people out there, and I definitely was that person in the past that was like, I mean, the classic athlete metaphor of like, only the weak athletes need water. Like, you need to do sprints to earn your break. And I'm
Pain is
like,
weakness leaving the body. No, it's not.
basically, you're like,
No, it's not.
oh
You're about to
goodness.
get hurt. But
Teaching
yeah.
good work ethic, and like, I need to like unlearn some of those things. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I digress.
Yeah. That's okay. We detour. It's gonna happen. It's still art related in the
Yes.
grand scheme of things, but
Yeah. So over the past year, how do you feel like moving into art space has gone? Obviously, we are both still getting used to our spaces and like acclimating to the whole, like, at least I was working on like traveling out of my apartment to go make artwork. It's a whole new like system and routine for me. You were kind of used to that because you had one, but how did art space specifically affect your goals or change things?
Well, it was big because the first space I moved into was like January 2020. So anyways, that's a dead season. It's cold. I had just left
Right.
my other job. And in a way, it was a place where I was testing out what it was like to work outside of my home. At that
Right. If
point,
you
I had
liked it.
always worked at home, like painted at home. Um, but that building did not get a lot of foot traffic, and I was still there when the pandemic hit, so that was even less. So mostly I was just in isolation painting.
Right.
Even
You're
if
like,
there
I'm
had
used to
not been a
this.
pandemic, it was still going to be isolated.
Right.
But then when I moved into art space, even though it wasn't open to the public at the time, it was still nice that as things started opening up, and then you remember we were only open like 1 day a week
Oh
eventually, and
yeah.
then 2 days a week, and then it's like we're closed again. And anyway, so there's a
Yeah.
lot of that. But it was nice to kind of like, instead of moving to a place that was always open to the public and having that overwhelm of like, how do I talk to people about my art? How do I sell them my art?
Right.
Wait, you're willing to give me money for this? This is amazing. Um,
Right.
but on a more consistent basis. It was nice that it was kind of gradual as it opened up.
Yeah. I
But I
agree
think
for sure.
I think the biggest thing though is getting that feedback from people directly, obviously, and we've mentioned this before, grain of salt, people, grain of
Yes.
salt. For both good stuff and bad stuff that they tell you, because they might be like, add a bird in a tree there. No, sir.
Right.
Um, or they might be like, oh, that looks like, I don't know, a river of trash. Lovely, thanks. You're gonna hear like strange things. You're
Or
also gonna
scuba
hear like,
monkey.
oh, the
Scuba
scuba
monkey.
monkey cow.
I
Yeah.
love
Oh
a
my god.
scuba monkey cow. So, a little context for listeners. Adriana made this one abstract painting. I can't remember if like you had thought of it before, seen it
Uh-uh.
before, as
I
soon
saw
as
the
I
scuba
saw
diver.
it, or someone else, and I was like, it literally looks like a monkey scuba diving underwater, but kind of a cow too. And once I like vision that in my brain, I'm like, I
You
can't
cannot
unsee
unsee
it.
it.
And I was
You
like,
cannot
I
unsee
still
it.
love it. But once it's stuff like that, and sometimes there are people that come to art space and
And they'll
then like
see things.
it kind of shifts the way you see your work for better or worse. They're like, their interpretation's not wrong, but sometimes it's like watching the clouds sometimes, especially with the abstract
You're
work
gonna
that
see what
we
you're gonna
do.
see.
You're like, there's a bunny in the sky. Like every time I look at this picture, there's a bunny hanging above my head in this sky. So the same thing with an abstract painting too.
Yeah, but that was part of it, getting to
Yeah.
interact with the public, getting to see, I'm just gonna lovingly call it the glowy eyes effect of when someone walks in, they resonate with your story, with your artwork, and they just give you the
Oh,
glow eye, like, I have to have
this
it.
is
Like, how
my
did you know? Or they can read some of the story behind it, and you're like, but how? It's abstract. But anyways, that's a
that's when
whole
you
different
know it's meant
episode.
to be theirs.
Yeah, well, and that's also how you know you're on the right track with what you're doing, and that what you have is so authentic that someone else is clicking with it,
Yeah.
from more than just an aesthetic level. There's like more to it. But anyways, another episode we should do in the future. Um,
How that was
but
going.
going back to how did the year go? Going back to that. Besides obviously loving the studio space, that we're super mega lucky and fortunate, and well, we did hard work to get in there too. So it's
Right.
not just rolling dice. Um, a lot of the goals that I had set for 2021 have been reached. Interestingly, some of them I had set them up at the beginning of the year, looked at them the first few months of the year, and then I put it away. And when I reviewed them about a month ago or so, I was like, check, check, check. Like, that's
That's
cool.
awesome.
It's basically like, kind of like aligning the goals that you have and then giving your brain the task of reverse engineering how you're going to get there. And as long as that intention is strong and true, then you can kind of work your way towards it. No miracles, no secret formulas, but you have to have the intention and then do the work, right?
Right. I think there's a big thing about like intentionality behind everything you do. Okay, this is
Exactly.
on the small scale, weekly or daily level. These are my tasks that I need to do.
And
But I
these are the
know
longer
by
term
doing
ones.
those, here are the long term what I'm working towards. And
Exactly.
constantly looking at them, constantly reassessing.
Or even if you don't
so important.
constantly look at them, because I didn't. I filed them away. Literally, they're in a grid journal,
Subconsciously.
and I filed it away and I locked it in the back of my head. And then the most important thing, which we'll also have to have an episode on this, of course, is
got my list.
yeah, well, and this one will go great with like goal planning and things like that for the beginning of the year. But it's basically that idea of, actually, we have an episode where kind of covered some of that, the one about defining success,
Yeah.
redefining success. But essentially, what it boils down to is, if you take the time, right, to sit down, think, analyze, plan, etc., what your main, let's call them North Stars are that you're working
Right.
towards, your main mountain, then it helps you better identify when opportunities come up, if they're in alignment or not, and then you choose. It just prepares you better. But anyways, so that's that. Some of the goals have been reached. Some of them have surpassed expectations, like the one of I'm gonna make 20 paintings in the series, 100 paintings later.
Truly.
So actually, I don't know if it's 100. It's definitely more than 60.
It's getting there.
Between 60 and 100. Let's go with that.
Knowing you, by the end of this year, you'll probably be at 100.
Oh yeah, that part's not a problem. And then some of the other goals, some of it I'm still like evaluating, okay, do I want to still try to reach it before the year's over?
Right.
Or is it just going to be postponed for 2022? So some things are on the sprint list that I'm working on. And some things I'm like, I'm okay with delaying. Like I've been meaning to do this painting class for the longest time that's recorded, and I haven't done it. I have too many other things to do. So
and I think that's really smart because it's also, as you near like the last 8 weeks or 6 weeks or 4 weeks of the year, realizing not being hard on yourself if certain goals were not met, because timing is everything, but also being realistic in terms of the quality of what you're producing, whether a physical painting or a class or whatever, of like, okay, if you're going to do it, you want to do it at a certain level of quality that would be required, that realistically is not obtainable in a shorter amount of time.
Plus, if your goals
you want to keep your sanity and not get crispy.
Yeah, well, and if your goals were really out there, which obviously we're not going to say you shouldn't.
Right.
I mean, it's up to you. Some people like to do really big goals, even if they don't think they're going to meet them, and then work from there. Other people like to just do something they know they can achieve, which we'd go somewhere in the middle, I think. Of those two. But yeah, it's realizing you're human, things are gonna happen, life's gonna happen. Why would you be hard on yourself? Did you actually make a true effort? Would always be my question. If you made an effort and it worked out, that's awesome. If you wanted it but didn't put in the work,
that's when you need to go to our time tracking episode. How you use your time to figure out what needs to be eliminated
and make the time. Everybody has the same 24 hours. So
Beyonce and us have the same 24 hours.
Maybe a little less Netflix. At least that's for me. That's how I found the time.
I think about one of my high school professors, my art professor, told me that very early on, and it completely stuck with me. I think that's why I'm like, probably to my detriment, like hyper aware of how I use my time. And he was like, there was one person in our class who like didn't turn in the assignment on time, which like, he was very nice about it. Our professor, he was definitely one of those professors that like taught life lessons. Like he didn't teach art. He taught you like about concepts and about life. Like he was such a gem. Jim Coleman, he's the best. So, but one person didn't put their assignment in on time, and the guy in our class was like, oh, well, like, I just didn't have time to do it. And he's like, well, correct me if I'm wrong. I think everyone in class had the same amount of time. The assignment was given on the same day. It was due on the same day. So shifting that phrasing of I didn't have enough time to I did not prioritize enough time.
And so add to that. Different. Yeah. And then add to that too, and be honest with yourself. Are you okay with it or not? Because sometimes it's like, I didn't prioritize it because there was something else that was more important. Okay, maybe don't do this for class when you have to turn in things that you get graded on.
This is not
but in general, yeah, and definitely with our art practices, there are times it's like, I wish I had done this, but I'm not gonna shoulda, coulda, woulda on myself.
Right.
I'm my own boss. I really should not be shaming myself I didn't do that. It's more like
crappy boss to yourself.
Yeah, no, just acknowledge it and then decide that you not do it because it was not a high priority, or maybe it was a high priority and you didn't set aside the time.
Right. And I think that's a really good thing to talk about. And another
podcast episode. Put it in our list. We need to put one about like shame and like productivity shame. How's that? Yeah, art productivity shame, something like that.
So this was going to be a year in review. Now it's just referencing old episodes and brainstorming new episodes.
Why not? I mean, this is
reflection and goal setting.
Look, Y'all, like, you'll listen to this podcast, you know, it's about the true blue artist life. So
This
this
is
is
a
part of it.
casual episode.
This is part of it. Yep.
Yeah. And
But
that's
anyways, going back to the reader and review.
yeah.
Yankee.
Okay, focus.
Okay, focus.
So
I'm gonna leave this
looking back,
for the record. All right. Okay.
so
All right.
in the realm of assessing priorities, I feel like looking back at my goals for this year, I feel like I did a pretty darn good job, to be honest. I kind of wish, thank you. I think definitely where I was a year ago is so different from where I am today. And I think both the art career and my day job has a lot to do with that in terms of I really wanted to learn about business and marketing and website strategy. And really, there's been things that have always interested me. And I was learning them on my own on the side, but going into an industry last December and doing that for my day job was like a dream come true because then I can apply it to my art business. So my newsletters went from once a month to once a week because I'm like, oh yeah, and I can tie this in and I can tie this in, strategically scheduling social media posts so that I could have more time in the studio, publishing my blogs and the podcast. And really, I think the icing on the cake for that was this Launch Raleigh program that I'm a part of now. So it's a small business entrepreneur program based here in Raleigh. We're in week 9 of 10 as of this recording. And it really has shifted my mind of thinking of my art business as a business, which has been a super, super empowering feeling, which I think was a huge focus of mine going into 2021 of rebuilding, establishing systems, establishing business strategy, and then artwork wise, really wanting to experiment and play and create more art products. Definitely something that was not on my radar was moving into a larger studio space. That was the perfect storm of right place, right time, right opportunity. So when I moved into art space, I was in Studio 214, my favorite little room. And then directly across the hall was a larger space. So the opportunity that opened up for me to move there. And honestly, it was such a blessing. But again, completely shifted my workflow, just like, and it was right in July again. So I feel like where I am now, art creative process wise, is kind of similar to where I was this time last year. But rather than adjusting from home studio to art space, I'm just now finally getting my footing of adjusting from Studio 214 smaller scale pieces to a studio basically 3 times the size. And what does that mean with my creative process? How big can I go? Like, by the time maybe this time next year, I'll just be doing full building size murals constantly at this rate. I'm going from like 6-inch pieces to 3-foot pieces, who knows,
Gazillion
pieces. I mean, my studio doesn't have a ceiling, so like there really are endless possibilities.
It does have a ceiling. It's just really high up. Come on now. Otherwise, for folks that haven't seen it, they might be like, hold up, so it rains in there? No, she just has a really tall ceiling.
Very tall vaulted ceiling. It's a cool old warehouse downtown. But I think a big lesson that I learned, ironically, with goal setting, and I kind of learned this in 2022, is for better or worse, I need to be better about setting goals and more intentional about it, because I find that, like you were talking about earlier, some people set goals that they know they can hit. Some people set super crazy goals. And I think we both definitely are kind of in the middle. But I kind of play it safe with my goals, which is good and bad in terms of I only set goals for stuff that I know I can hit and maybe want to challenge myself a little bit. So looking into the next year, I definitely want to plan, now that I feel like I have that business foundation that's ever evolving, but I want to make more art process goals like you were last year or this past year of creating that series, creating the 20 pieces that turn into 50. I think that makes a lot of sense to be one of my goals for next year, which we'll dive into later. So it makes sense with our creative journeys of like, all right, I don't know, looking at your old goals and like, hey, should that be my goal too? And constantly reassessing.
I know. And I'm like, I thought that 20 to 25 pieces in that series was enough. And January, I did 31. So it's like, wait, I surpassed that goal in 1 month. Whoops. I meant to take that way longer than I meant it to spread it at least 6 months. Nope.
Yeah,
so I'm with you.
In 2020, my goal for the entire year was I want to get one piece of artwork in display in Raleigh. And then I had like a display of 6 pieces. So I'm like, well, crap, what do I do now? And that's one thing when we talk to a lot of artists is a weirdly common problem, I think, of like, what do you do when you outrun your goals? Like, okay, you're setting your vision on this thing, but like, what happens once you hit it?
You celebrate. We have an episode on that.
Yep. Plug last episode. This episode's blog post is just going to be like an archive of all of our episodes. But yeah, definitely celebrate it. But then also needing to constantly, okay, now what is that next level? What is that next level? And not just settle on, well, I guess I'm done for the year. I'm going to kick back and wait for.
I mean, and if you want to do that, I mean, we're not judging for the record. Because for some folks, they might be like, did it? We're out. Like, no more pressure, or whatever. I'm going to play the rest of the year. I hit my money goals. So I don't have to sell anything for the rest of the year. And some artists will do that. And that's fine. We ain't judging you. We're good.
Yeah.
But definitely, yeah, I like that. And when we do that upcoming podcast episode about planning for the year, we'll definitely talk more about that. But also, and before we forget, like we've so far talked mostly about some of our individual goals and kind of how it's gone for us 2020, 2021, that whole hot mess, good and bad. But I'll say one of the things too that I want to make sure we mention, especially since you guys are listening to this, is the podcast. So one thing that Jackie and I did throughout the time after we met in 2019 and keeping ourselves sane through the worst parts of the pandemic was actually talking about collaborating together. And at first we didn't know what that would look like, but actually one of them was the podcast. So we were both trying to figure out, how do we take, in your case, you wanted to network, obviously, right? That was part of your goals. In mine, it was like giving back somehow, sharing. I came from the business world. I came from a business education. So it was kind of like, okay, can we exchange, was the way I would always see it. You know, I didn't come from art school. You did, but I came from business school. And it's like, wait a minute.
And we both have a marketing type background and wanting to share.
I am a marketing major, so yes. Yeah. And technology.
I was working in marketing. So exactly. All these parallels and crossing paths up kind of seemed like that perfect fit, especially after, like you were saying, being weekly. We were doing like weekly check-ins basically during the pandemic. It's like we already kind of built that professional relationship beyond just like occasionally seeing each other at crits. It was like, okay, she's put up with me every single week for 4 hours for like 3 months already. Like,
and I was painting while we were talking, for the record, y'all. Like we were multitasking, for the record.
True. She was painting out on my 12
workout probably
walks, basically. But it was really cool thinking about, like, rather than simply your own personal goals, your creative goals, your business goals, but also what type of partnership goals you want to have, even related to like your family's goals or what are your other priorities. And I think that was one thing that both you and I, Adriana, knew at the end of 2020 of we had the idea of the podcast and some other things, but a partnership in some aspect between us was kind of a given at that point, that we knew it would be one of our set priorities for the past year.
Yeah, it was definitely a together goal. And it took many months. So speaking of trial and error, I think we did like some of our first test recordings like January.
Yeah.
And yeah, some of those podcast episodes will never see the light of day. They were bad.
Sitting in the floor of my apartment. We had like
Oh
a
my God. In front of
whiteboard.
the sofa, kind of leaning sideways. Oh
Oh
my
my
God.
goodness.
Looking at the camera, looking at each other, looking at the camera. It's like, where do I look?
Maybe once
Anyways,
we hit like 100 episodes, we can release those as like a
like a little
blooper
clip.
reel.
Yeah, it'll definitely be bloopers. Just knocking over microphone or cups
Oh
of
my
water.
goodness. I would like
Anyways.
randomly start dancing during an episode or like, oh, we
Or we
weren't
would
recording
burst out
this.
laughing. We both would like we get
That
the
still
giggles.
happens.
Yeah,
That
it
still
still
happens.
does. But it was interesting, and this is something we'd like, our listeners to consider, having artists, friends where you can leverage each other's strengths to
Yeah.
actually do something together. Because honestly, yes, I wanted to do a podcast, but if I wanted to do it on my own, it probably would have never come to light. I'm like, I
Right.
know how to edit it, but for example, I'm not that strong in terms of the copywriting. I
Right.
take, I mean, I can talk like in front of a camera. Okay, that took a while to get used to, but I can talk like it's a normal conversation and I'm good typing it up.
Brainstorm
However,
ideas.
and structuring it and then making a PDF, that's Jackie. That's all Jackie. And I was like, I can do the editing, techie, nerdy bits if you'll do like the writing bit and create the bones of the episode.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we
Our
definitely worked together. Again, we hit a lot of bumps. And then finally, May of this year, ta-da, May 2021, the
May 4th.
podcast, May the 4th be with you.
Yes.
Star Wars Day. No, they don't pay us to say this, obviously. But yeah, hey, woo, hello. But
Manifest it.
I know, right? But basically, like it took a lot of work. It took a lot of hours
Yeah.
and brainstorming and business meetings to make it happen. But we still encourage you all to try to figure out how you can collab with others and kind of get things done that perhaps on your own you wouldn't. But then the other thing that we had, more on that the next episode, actually.
Yeah.
Another thing that we had was like, okay, so we're networking, we're meeting all these local artists, we're exchanging information. Okay, what do you do? What do I do? Like, how can we leverage that together? And then it turned into how can we give that back? So that's part of where the no surprises here, people. That's where the whole level up artist community idea was essentially born. Do you want to talk a little bit more about
Exactly.
that, Jackie?
Yeah, and I think really when we were brainstorming it early in the year, both the podcast and the membership, they kind of went hand in hand for
Yep.
us. They were like you were talking about, both of us wanting to share what we have learned, things that other people have
Mhm.
shared with us, putting our art degrees, our business degrees, our marketing experience to the use of others, and really just sharing that forward because we know how isolating we felt. We know, especially with the pandemic, but we had already built that professional relationship and that
Mhm.
raw, authentic communication with each other, where like we both trust each other's vision. We trust the other person to be honest. So that's the other key part. Going back to partnerships, real quick, of if you decide to collaborate with other creatives, make sure that that communication is there. Just like any type of friendship or relationship or partnership, making sure that you're always reassessing and making sure that you have that same end goal in mind, because I think we kind of, I mean, as cheesy as it sounds, like hit magic with our friendship and just like it just worked great. But it's because we relate on so many levels. We keep each other grounded on so many levels. But sometimes that takes a while to find the right fit for you.
Mhm.
So definitely reach out to people and find people that you can collaborate with if you have a project in mind, but also maybe have a couple going at one time and see which partners work best for you. So when we started the podcast, that was kind of our first taste of putting information out in the world together, finding,
Yep.
obviously we had talked weekly on our phone calls, where I think at the end of every phone call, we're like, man, I wish we recorded that. Like someone else could probably really use this information. And we're like, why don't we? But then as soon as we launched the podcast, the idea of we just want to keep giving kept coming up.
Exactly.
And we love podcasts. We both listen to them all the time, even watching YouTube videos. But realistically, there's so much more that also can be accomplished with structured training videos, with PDF resources showing you specifically and other artists, hey, come take a look over my shoulder at my laptop. This is how I set up my spreadsheets. I'll share it with you. This is how you can do yours. How about you? And that collaboration energy is something that, unfortunately, as of now, you cannot get with a one directional audio podcast. So that's really where the Level Up Artists stemmed from. Once we launched the podcast, knowing that on the podcast, we would be sharing ideas and tips and tricks in the best way we could, but really within Level Up Artists membership, we go straight to the source of showing not just what we do as career-minded artists, but how we do it step by step, showing all of our cards so that we can help other emerging artists save time on their creative journey, give them that like golden chest of templates and PDFs and resources. Like, I've already done the deep dive on X topic on YouTube for 20 hours. Here's the culmination of my research.
30 minutes. Enjoy.
Right. Here's the culmination of my research. And here is take what pieces are helpful for you, but here's all it is in one spot. And having that collaboration area with other artists has been so amazing. So we launched the Level Up Artist membership in July of 2021. And we are now reopening for enrollment. So we really want to be able to bring people into the community as a cohort, a group of emerging artists and established artists. So that way you get that community, you get that small group feel within our larger community. So we're only opening a few times a year to keep that bond strong. And so 1 week from when this episode airs, we will be reopening enrollment for our community for the next group of students. So November 30th is when enrollment opens, and you can join until December 14th.
Yeah, this is really exciting. The description about the Level Up community, the pricing options, the sign up to get on your waiting list, they can all be found at Level Up Artists, that's with an S at the end, .com. We're really excited to grow our community and grow our family of artists that we've been working with. And if you haven't seen it yet, you probably will, on our social media channels. We actually put together a masterclass, and it is so exciting. It's about going from your art passion to a sustainable art business, and it's 10 key elements that you will need to succeed. That's how we titled the class, and it's free. It's 100% free, by the way.
Yeah.
And when you click the link, you can watch it, see the rest of the information. We'll have a podcast episode that's going to be linked in there. There's going to be free PDF downloads in there. So anyways, go check it out. All the information will obviously be with the episode, but we're looking forward to hearing from you, seeing how you like the masterclass, and yeah, if there are any of the steps that we cover in it that you're going to put into action.
Yep. So we really hope you guys enjoy that masterclass. We look forward to hearing what you guys think about it, and welcoming our new Level Up artists starting 1 week from when this episode is aired. But really looking back on all of 2021, it has been such an amazing year. I can say for myself personally, for both of us together. And so we just wanted to thank you guys, our listeners of Art Studio Insights podcast, our collectors who have purchased pieces of ours, and really everyone who is in or supports their local art community, whether you're local to Raleigh or abroad. It really makes such a difference in the community that you are building, both from your local city, your town, or the arts community specifically, because it makes such a difference having that kind of support and knowing that there are people in your corner cheering you on.
So always the optimist, always staying positive. We really believe 2022 is going to be an amazing year. At least we really hope it will be, of course. And we're so excited to continue to share with you all through the podcast, through visitors in our studios, our founding members, and new members that are coming into the membership, all the accumulated knowledge between Jackie and myself, as well as other artists that have very generously shared their lessons with us. Business knowledge, art knowledge, basically all the behind the scenes of what goes into having an art business and having a full-time art practice or working practice or working towards it, right?
Yes.
So we will continue to share with you all. We're very excited to do so. We're also very excited about next week's episode, but you'll have to wait for that. Haha.
Yes.
It's a mystery. Okay, I'm just kidding. Anyways, you'll find out. But for now, I would say this is definitely a wrap on today's conversation. We really hope you enjoyed this episode and got to gleam a little bit into what actually goes through our planning process, or at least like the kind of goal setting that we do and kind of how we handle it.
Exactly. And as always, both of our blogs will be linked in today's episode show notes, where you can find a full list of notes from today's episodes, as well as links to resources and all of our other podcast episodes on our blogs as well.
Yep. And as always, if you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, have feedback, anything really, share what you've learned, you can follow us on social media. I'm at Amate Art across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.